Good morning and welcome to the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities. My name is Tsering Pasang, convener and founder of the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities. We are a human rights and advocacy group campaigning for the rights of the peoples of Tibet, East Turkestan, as well as for all those minorities who are facing persecutions, especially in China. Today, we are once again very delighted to host this special webinar on the groundbreaking resolution by UK lawmakers in declaration of Uyghur genocide. Nearly 2 million Uyghur Muslims are locked up in the Chinese concentration camps and are used as forced labor to fuel the Chinese economy. Only last week, on 22nd April, we all saw a robust debate in the UK Parliament on the declaration of Uyghur genocide committed by the Chinese state. Subsequently, the UK Parliament was in unanimous with one voice and declared Uyghur genocide to what has been happening in Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, also known as East Turkestan, under the brutal Chinese regime. The independent East Turkestan was occupied by the People's Republic of China after the Chinese Communist Party came to power in October 1949. The peaceful people of East Turkestan, including the Uyghur Muslims, have endured unimaginable hardships, including tortures and deaths under the brutal Chinese regime over the past 7 decades. This is very much similar to the Tibetan people in China's occupied Tibet over the same period. For this recent historic declaration in the UK Parliament against the Chinese state's actions in East Turkestan, we at the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities wish to sincerely acknowledge and thank the UK parliamentarians, including all those 23 MPs who actively engaged in this robust debate on the 22nd April. By doing so, the UK parliamentarians and this great nation have sent a strong message to Beijing that the wrongful actions are unacceptable and they must take corrective measures. It also calls on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government to take appropriate actions when dealing with the Chinese government. And for the people of East Turkestan, Uyghurs, Muslims, and to all those who continue to endure repressions under the Chinese government, the UK Parliament and these great nations have shown that Britain has not forgotten them, and the British public will continue to speak up for their fundamental rights. So, a very special thank you and my deep personal gratitude to Ms. Nasrat Ghani, an amazing member of parliament for Wealden, also a former minister, for spearheading this very important debate in the parliament. Ms. Ghani is joining us today as our guest keynote speaker. Our amazing panels are Ms. Nasrat Ghani, a member of parliament from the ruling conservative government, Grace Sargent from Henry Jackson Society, Rahima Mahmood from the World Uyghur Congress, Berzin Wagner from SOAS University of London, and Priyajit Devsarkar, an author and independent geopolitical analyst. Mr. Priyajit Devsarkar is sharing today's webinar. I would like to thank Priyajit for helping me with today's important webinar. Priyajit Devsarkar is an independent, as I said earlier, an independent geopolitical analyst with special interest in the political history of the Indian subcontinent. He is the author of The Last Raja of West Pakistan and the Atlantic Attack and attribution. He frequently writes and appears on various channels and shares his expertise. Pirajit is a pharmacist by profession and works for an NHS hospital in London. So I'm going to pass over to Priyajit, and I wish all the viewers a very um, fruitful session. So over to Priyajit. Are you there?
Thank you very much, Saring, and I really congratulate all the members of the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities and this fantastic panel. It gives me great honor and pleasure to welcome Ms. Nusrat Ghani, our keynote speaker, and you have already given her introduction. So, without any further ado, I will probably go to her. I would just like to ask you, madam, as well, that in the Guardian, you have been quoted saying that the work does not stop here. So, if you could kindly enlighten us on the future, roadmap, as you may see with other democracies of the world, and your reactions of being the author of this landmark motion in the British Parliament. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, good morning. Good morning from the United Kingdom. It's a gorgeous sunny morning here in the UK, and hello to all the audience. I'm incredibly delighted to be on such a stellar panel this morning. But I must put on record that the achievements of the UK Houses of Parliament unanimously backing my motion, that all the evidence that we have of a potential genocide taking place against the Uyghur at the hands of the CCP is in fact genocide. All 5 markers have been met, but that work I was able to undertake because of the huge campaigning work that is done by IPAC, the World Uyghur Congress, and I personally must thank Rahima Mahmoud for constantly not only campaigning but working so closely with myself over the last 12 months. So to get back to your question, what happens next? Let me just first establish what has happened. Since we have been signed up to the UN Convention on Genocide, the United Kingdom's Parliament has never declared a genocide over those 75 years. On the 22nd of April, I was able to put a case forward based on the evidence put forward by either legal experts or either researchers, academics, and also coming from UN reports that highlighted that all 5 markers of genocide, the intent to commit those crimes, was taking place against the Uyghur. The Houses of Parliament has 650 members of Parliament. Not all of us can be in Parliament at the moment because of COVID, but we had a 3-hour debate and my motion was moved, and not a single member of Parliament or a government minister disputed the evidence that we put forward. So the UK Houses of Parliament made a unanimous decision to declare that a genocide is taking place against the Uyghur. That is quite a profound moment. It's never happened in our UK Parliament's history. And one of the fallouts of that, in response to your question, is that many other national parliaments will be taking that motion forward to debate the evidence. This isn't a political debate. These aren't parties trying to score political points, but look at the harsh evidence. And it was very somber on the 22nd of April when we discussed the evidence of abuse against the Uyghur. So other national parliaments will be moving this motion too. And the reason why we are doing this is twofold. One is because we all accept when it comes to investigating or preventing a genocide, the United Nations is broken. It is a busted flush. It's held hostage by China and Russia, and it cannot function. So we need to make sure that our national parliaments are doing the work that the UN can't do. We also want to give confidence to our national executives, to our national governments, that there is a collaboration that can be formed with other allied Western democracies to try and deal with the atrocities taking place with Xinjiang. So the unanimous backing of my motion means that the United Kingdom's government is being pushed into having a better position on the Uyghur and genocide, because we cannot keep coming back to Parliament and saying we're waiting for the UN, but we know the UN is broken. We're concerned about the evidence, but now the UK Parliament has said the evidence has reached the threshold. We cannot work unilaterally. We can now evidence when other national parliaments move the motion. We can work with our partners around the world. So that is one of the outcomes that is most definitely going to take place. One of the reasons why so many MPs were involved in the debate, and not a single MP disputed the evidence, is we did a tremendous amount of work with the World Uyghur Congress and IPAC on the trade bill to stop the United Kingdom offering preferential trade deals with genocidal states. And MPs, not every MP was engaged, but because of the sanctions, a number of us MPs were put under by the CCP for raising human rights abuses. Every MP wanted to know what was going on. So they began to investigate, explore, and come to their own conclusion. And members of parliament are now also expressing a view that we cannot be offering or negotiating a preferential trade deal with China until all members of parliament and British citizens are unsanctioned for raising human rights abuses. That is another process that is the fallout of the conclusion of the unanimous vote on the 22nd of April. We're also asking the government now to work with like-minded countries like Canada, America, Australia, and other national governments that will move the same motion to set up an alternative investment fund to compete or be an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is unfortunately buying silence from developing countries who then do not speak up when criminality takes place at international institutions, the UN, for example, because it's basically stymieing the work that the United Nations can do. So we need to now have an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative as well. We're also making very clear to our government that when we know that the United Nations is broken, we now need to see, if we cannot rely on international court, what competent national courts can we rely on to investigate and determine if a genocide is taking place. And the reason why this is key is because we are absolutely concerned that the evidence that we have will disappear. A lot of the evidence that we have to show us that the markers of genocide are being met were in the public domain, put out there by the Chinese Communist Party because they were so proud of the actions they were taking. And we are now incredibly concerned that that data will disappear. If I'll just give you one brief example, is that the data that we have on the shocking drop in birth rate of Uyghur women, in one region is 84%, which then links into the number of IUDs that are inserted into Uyghur women to stop them having children. This data was put forward by the Chinese government, but the most recent data on birth rates now doesn't break it down. So we can't work out what's happening within Xinjiang or within the Uyghur women, and we are anxious that that data is going to disappear. One of the markers of genocide is the intent to stop people having children, and we know that's taking place against the Uyghur women. So just being deliberate in collecting that data before it disappears as well. So the 22nd wasn't the end, it was a start. But what it's enabled us to do is to fast track all the work we're going to do over the next 18 months into making sure it's done over the next few months. And one of the moments we're waiting for in the United Kingdom is when G7 takes place. And we're going to do everything that we can to ensure that the plight of the Uyghur people and the determination of genocide is front and center of G7 when the world is looking on in the United Kingdom when we lead in that global conference.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ghani. Really insightful analysis and lots of information. So it's a very valid point you raise about the Belt and Road Initiative and the economic, the might which the Chinese state has. There is no doubt that they have probably that amount of capacity. However, post-COVID, do you think the G7 and other countries, especially, are you relying on any other Asian partners to join this alliance and take it forward? One. And second is that, let's say, with the trade deals, especially with the European Union, do you think is that an area which you could probably look into to see what kind of free trade agreements they have with the Chinese state? Thank you.
Well, one of the fallouts of the sanctions is the way that governments are responding to their parliamentarians being sanctioned. And I think if the CCP understood how Western democracies work, or how members of parliament are elected, because we're elected on the back of our constituents locally having their confidence in representing them in parliament. And if the CCP understood democracy, they'd understand, actually, I'm not afraid of my prime minister or a minister, I'm afraid of my constituents. I need to make sure I'm delivering for them. So this is peculiar. I think the CCP thought when they were going to sanction MPs, members of parliament, that they were going to isolate us or create a tension between us and ministers, the prime minister. That definitely has not happened. And one concrete example of this, how that has failed, is that the mood music that's coming out of Brussels that they don't want to progress the trade deal with China until its MEPs are unsanctioned. So this is going to be quite crucial if that follows through. And that's one of the things that we are saying to our Prime Minister, is that we cannot be negotiating preferential trade deals until at least its own elected members of Parliament of its own party are unsanctioned. Of course, in the UK, we're in a very unique position post-Brexit that we have to now negotiate our own trade deals. But just as we're having very high standards on animal welfare, environmental standards, we also need to have the highest standards on human rights. And there's nothing higher than ensuring that we're not trading with a genocidal state. And if China had nothing to hide, it would not be sanctioning its own MPs. So parliaments and Brussels are now in a very tricky place, but the mood music they're putting out is that they're backing their MPs and MEPs, and they just want China to do the right thing, at the very least allow investigations to take place. If I get back to the Belt and Road Initiative, look, I'm a realist. The amount of money that goes into that, I don't think any national government is going to be able to compete. So the point is this: we need to work collaboratively with our partners. And I know that President Biden's office has already put out incredibly positive sounds. Within 24 hours of us MPs being sanctioned to show support, but also that they fundamentally believe there needs to be an alternative infrastructure fund to enable developing countries to use their voice at international institutions, but also to enable us to continue to promote democracies, to promote the liberal way that we conduct ourselves, because we cannot allow our values to be devalued. And there's nothing harsher than allowing a country that could be, as we have determined, that is involved in genocide, setting the standards around the world. Those aren't the standards that we want to comply with. They're the standards that we have won, hard-fought standards in the Western democracy that we now need to promote. So there is a huge amount of talk, and I believe there'll be positive movement at G7 in June, how we promote our values, how we promote international law, and how we can try and conduct ourselves with our partners, and also have an alternative infrastructure fund as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kani. So it's really fantastic to hear you. So I don't think there is any other further questions in the chat. I can't see any. So, and I'm aware that you were pressed for time. So we are very grateful that you have taken your time out of your busy schedule to join us. So I would really thank you once again for your participation, and hopefully look for your cooperation in the future. Thank you very much, madam. Have a very nice day.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to now introduce our next speaker, Mr. Gray Sargent. He's a research fellow in the Henry Jackson Society Asia Study Centers. He has also worked in a lot of other political capacities, like in campaigning roles of the Labour Party, as well as working in the UK Parliament. In 2017, he co-founded the Hong Kong Watch, which is very much relevant. So we extend a very warm welcome to you, sir. And if you could give your opening remarks and maybe focus a bit on, and not only Hong Kong, which you are obviously an expert on, but the sanctioning move. How do you see the actions of the Communist Party dealing with the elected representatives of Western democracies and democracies across the world? Thank you. Sorry, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Better now?
Yes, much better.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the invite. It's a real pleasure to be here and speak amongst some fantastic speakers. And I'd like to put on record my praise for Zergani and her colleagues and the World Uyghur Congress in the work that they've done. I think the UK government has been slow, and often the advances that have been made have been because of parliamentary pressure. So I think it's really important that the UK parliamentarians keep it up. Perhaps I'll start off with conceding a few points to the government's point of view, that they have expressed quite clearly that they believe that the determination of genocide should be a matter for what they call a competent court. And I think there is some merit to that argument. And I think parliamentarians during the debate last week acknowledged their point of view. But of course, the vote in Parliament is not a substitution for a legal rule. And And indeed, I imagine parliamentarians will carry on pushing for it, as they should. And of course, genocide being one of the most heinous crimes against humanity, it is only right that due process is followed, and that for the benefit of the cause and for the Uyghurs who need justice, that they get their day in court. Obviously, there's problems with this, and I don't think the government are helping to resolve them. Perhaps I'll get onto that later. I know previously also the government have argued that their hands shouldn't be tied by their trade deals shouldn't be tied by a court, and it's a matter for the government. Again, a reasonable position, but when parliamentarians proposed an amendment, I believe the government did not select it, and very much frustrated the process. And I think this comes in the backdrop of a general sort of slowness and unwillingness to act. Earlier this year, we had a few concessions which dealt with the updates to the Modern Slavery Act. We had changes on export controls, sort of minor changes around the edges, which didn't quite do enough. And then we had sanctions put in place, which I commend, but that was quite slow. And the government would say that it took time because we had to get an international coalition together to make them more impactful. But then you end up in a situation where there's a consensus reached, but someone like Chen Quanguo is not included in the list, and that really does seem completely unacceptable, given that people below him were sanctioned, yet the top guy in Xinjiang has not been held to account for the crimes that he's committing there. And we know that he's got a track record for this sort of thing in Tibet too. So to return to the government's position on the determination of genocide and why it's problematic, as you all probably know, the international courts, the ICJ, their hands are tied with a Chinese veto, and there are problems with getting UN inspectors on the ground into Xinjiang. So while the government's position is reasonable that it's up for a competent court to do something about it, they seem to be frustrating any effort to actually allow a court decision to take place, and that is deeply regretful, I think. So that certainly does need to change, and it's been mentioned work at the UN going forward, and we should of course accept the limitations that are there. Pleased that Dominic Raab mentioned Xinjiang in his opening remarks to the United Nations Human Rights Council earlier this year. Was pretty blunt about the sort of systematic, what he called the industrial scale human rights abuses going on there, and pushing for access to Xinjiang. But I think there's probably more that the UK government can do, and if it's unwilling to make its own determination without a UN vote, it should be pushing harder at the UN to raise the profile of Uyghur voices and continue building coalitions in support of holding China to account for its human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Nusrat Ghani already mentioned some of the problems with this, being that China has done quite a lot to cement its own control over UN institutions, and it's been rather adept at building a coalition of allies that will defend China's human rights positions. And I know that in previous years we've seen countries from across the developing world, Middle East, Africa, sign up to statements in support of China's work China's actions in Xinjiang. We've seen notable world leaders like Imran Khan in Pakistan remain very, very quiet about these sort of things. And I think Human Rights Watch highlighted an example of a conference held by China and African diplomats in order to whitewash what was going on there and get support from African leaders to the actions carried out by China. And of course, this is a wider problem. I think many think tanks and human rights organizations have pointed to China's grip over UN institutions, and that this is going to be a long battle to overcome them, and specifically problems within the Human Rights Council. I think we've seen small scale examples of harassment of Uyghur and other ethnic minority groups and their activists at the UN to try and discredit them, to not provide them a platform. But there's also the problem of wider changes that China is trying to introduce at the UN Human Rights Council, things that would marginalize the role of civil society, which I think is critical for Uyghur voices and getting these groups the attention they deserve on the world stage. And I think we've also seen an attempt by China to just rewrite the rules over human rights by making them conditional on development. And by doing so, they can claim that what they're doing in Xinjiang is for the greater good, and it's all about development, and then we can have human rights. And there's also been talk of trying to introduce into human rights the sort of our global understanding of human rights, the idea that that sovereignty should also be protected, which of course for Uyghurs and Tibetans and other groups is at complete odds to their right to self-determination, and of course, you know, our wider understanding of universal human rights. So I think there's a real big challenge facing us. As I said, you know, the UK government needs to get its own house in order. It's very well of them to say that they want to wait for a legal determination, but they can't simply keep on frustrating the process, and they need to actually work with parliamentarians to come up with a solution. If they want to wait for a court to decide, then they should be proactively going out there and working with others in order to ensure that a court decision can be made, if need be, in a British court. But so far they've been reluctant to do it. And then, to show further leadership, they should be driving this forward at the United Nations and working with like-minded allies to win over the hearts and minds of other countries to ensure that China can't escape justice at the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It was quite fascinating that you did mention about sovereignty, which ties in with the notion of the one China doctrine which they have, and obviously you have also mentioned about other states, you know, neighboring, like, you know, leaders of Pakistan who have shown bit, you know, reluctance to accept this. Do you think that the UK and the others, especially like the Quad, can they play a very important role in setting up an alternative, as Ms. Ghani has uh, stressed? And is it really feasible that, do you think, in the long run, can they really deliver an alternative to the CCP?
In relation to human rights, I think it's probably quite a difficult one, because I think people are right to highlight the influence of Belt and Road. That certainly, for example, Pakistan does, you know, it is highly dependent on Belt and Road for its investment. Likewise, Myanmar. But of course, these countries also have their own reasons for not, you know, being in favour of what is understood as universal human rights, which they might see as Western. You know, Myanmar is a good example. Despite democratization over the 10 years until obviously the events of this year, we still saw Myanmar side with China at the United Nations, and part of that was possibly the influence of Belt and Road, but part of it is also, given what they were doing to the Rohingya people, that they were also keen to see UN mechanisms weakened, to see less scrutiny from the international community. Likewise, you know, other countries in the developing world might not sign up to, you know, the human rights as they stand, because they might want to introduce their own cultural exceptions or historical or developmental reasons why their own country cannot or does not want to sign up to these things. So it would probably be very, very difficult. But I think that if you look at the votes in the United Nations Human Rights Council, when it comes to changing, you know, our understanding of human rights and the mechanisms to hold countries to account, there is you know, China hasn't won them all, and while there is clearly a growing block of countries getting behind China, there's still many countries that sit in the middle, and I think it's about trying to win them over. But I'm pleased, for example, that under the Biden administration, America will be seeking to rejoin the Human Rights Council as a full member, and certainly I think with America on board, and if we can get some unity between Five Eyes, European countries, that should certainly bolster our chances.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you if there is any further questions in the chat, but thank you very much for your
Good,
time.
thank you.
I really appreciate it, and we hope that we can get you in the future as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to now introduce to you Ms. Rahima Mahmood. She is not only the UK director of the World Uyghur Council based in London, but she's also a prominent member of the civil society and was instrumental in this historic resolution. So we welcome you, madam, in today's webinar. We thank you for the time, and I would just like to get your initial reactions, from the events on the 22nd of April. And lastly, if you could maybe touch upon what kind of ramifications do you think, especially women and children and others of your community might face back in China post this resolution? Thank you very much.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Since the genocide motion passed the parliament unanimously, and this didn't happen like overnight. Obviously, you must be aware about the campaign, World Uyghur Congress, and under the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign, we had cross-community, cross-party, cross-faith, and many people involved in pushing the government to recognize what is happening to my people is genocide. Therefore, I would like to thank everyone who's involved from all different community. So it is not achieved by one organization or one person. This is a collaborated work that we worked very hard. And of course, this is the first time the UK has recognized a genocide when it is taking place. So this is historic, and it is a historic. And also, if you watched the debate, when MPs spoke about what is happening, it covered in their emotional speech covered about what is happening, citing the testimony of millions that locked in camps, forced sterilization, rape, children taken away from parents, and the entire culture and the religion being destroyed. This is all based on the facts that we obtained through survivors and through research reports, leaked documents from the Chinese government's own publications. And therefore, this is also a kind of landmark moment for Uyghur people, because it has been over 4 years now. Even for myself, I lost contact with my entire family, friends, or anyone in the region since January 2017. So we know the genocide is taking place, and it was extremely difficult to convince others, to believe that is happening in this 21st century. So having UK Parliament, parliamentarians pass this and recognize this as genocide, it is extremely important. For any kind of crime, the first thing is to recognize and to name the crime, what it is, and then you can take action against that crime. Therefore, it is a very important step. But obviously, UK Parliament was not the first parliament, recognize this, but it didn't happen that easily. because through the genocide amendment campaign, because the UK always had this the debate that the genocide should be defined in court, but because we couldn't get that vote to pass in the parliament, government fiercely against this, for UK court to have a UK court or even Parliament Judicial Committee. But when it comes to motion, and we build up the kind of support, and also during those two campaign, or during the previous campaign on genocide vote, already educated the MPs, all the MPs, that what is going on in the Uyghur region, in East Turkestan. So therefore, I wasn't surprised that, when I learned that was passed unanimously. But it was very, very emotional. And of course, the World Uyghur Congress, and the Uyghurs all around the world, we welcome this. Of course, the things cannot stop here. Obviously, what is next is important. So the next step is we ask the government, to strengthen its response, its response to the Uyghur genocide, and we demand stronger sanctions on the Chinese government officials most responsible for the camps where millions are imprisoned. And we have several campaigns now ongoing with Free Tibet, for example, the Bench Chen Quanguo campaign. We ask government to sanction Chen Quanguo, the number one, top man in the region who terrorized Tibet for 5 years before, took over the top job in August 2016. So that is one of the quite important campaign. And we also have other campaigns upcoming, specifically how Chinese government, how the UK government can, stop the forced labor products in this country. So there are many other things that people can take action, and also join the campaign to inform our parliamentarians to support further action, and so the UK government can do meaningful actions, take actions to help the Uyghurs.
Thank you very much, Rahima. It is always, very touching to listen to you, because you have personal, stories to tell, and people are in contact with you, I'm sure, from the region, who update you. But I would just like to ask you, maybe, is there any other help which we could extend to the people on the ground there? Because I'm sure that the Communist Party has not taken this unanimous motion by the UK Parliament. So is there anything else which we need to be careful of going forward, just to anticipate, their future moves? Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. At the moment, I mean, especially after UK and EU collaborated and sanctioned 4 Chinese officials, and the propaganda about the fake news. They say the everything what is claimed to be happening are fake. And so disinformation, spreading disinformation, and there are many videos the CCP made, especially there's one 53-minute length video about so-called Xinjiang, that many people are forced to confess, mostly intellectuals, and to accept that they were involved in basically fitting in the China's, the CCP's narrative to convince the public that in fact this is what China is doing is fighting against terrorism, not against the Uyghur people. Therefore, also since the parliament passed the genocide motion unanimously, again they are using some legal experts disputing what is happening is genocide. So obviously in every debate, you cannot get 100%, experts agree with something. And then so they're using the voice of those who doubted about what is happening is genocide and using their big names and disputing. So these are the facts, and I would like people to read about the testimonies, the personal testimonies of Uyghurs living in exile, and especially those who survive, the camp survivors, and what they are telling, what is happening inside the camp, and also the family, the parents of those children living in abroad, not being able to contact their children. And we have thousands of people, or I can say even million, unaccounted for. And why China is blocking the information if they are not committing anything as horrific as genocide. So people need to really, when they read anything that is pro-China, they must also look at and read the true account of what is happening, and then they can make up their mind. They make up their mind. Also, lastly, I would call people to join the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign in the UK, and we have a lot work to do. We know we need as many people to support this campaign. We have a long way to go, because every single day passing, I know every single day my people are suffering. Children are crying for their parents, and unimaginable pain that people are going through. And especially this month is a month of Ramadan. I cannot imagine, my people, my family, and what they are going through at the moment.
Thank you very much, Rahima. We will definitely cooperate, extend all our cooperation with your campaign, and we hope through our platform you get even more, people who are interested. So really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now we have almost come towards the closing bits of our webinar. It takes me great pleasure to introduce Burzin Wagmar. Dr. Wagmar is a active member of the Library of School of African and Oriental Studies, University of London. He is also very highly respected in the fields of geopolitics, and when it comes to China and its neighbors, he's also associated with the Center for Study of Pakistan. Thank you very much, sir, joining us. I think you are joining us from India at the moment due to the travel restrictions, so we are mindful of the time. Your opening remarks on the events of the 22nd of April, and if I may be tempted to ask you a question, is how do you make of the neighborhood of China? Because that is something which you closely are an observer and a specialist on when it comes to genocide and its allies of China. Thank you. Sorry, I think you're on. I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you unmute me, please, as the moderator? Because I believe
yes,
I can't do
yes,
it.
I think it's working now. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. First things first, and it gives me no pleasure in pointing this out, taking a cue from Raima Mahmood's closing remarks of Ramadan, that she cannot even begin to imagine what is happening. Actually, Raima Mahmood, I can, and may I comment on it, unpleasant and awfully unsavory as it sounds. it's Ramadan, and the CCP authorities are force feeding pork. It's not that they're not force feeding pork to Uyghurs during the rest of the year, that too, but they take particular pleasure in so doing during Ramadan, as you know only too well, because Han Chinese turn up at Uyghur households with national television camera in tow to show national integration and all that, as if they are bringing evening iftar treats to the said family. And lo and behold, what do we find on the tray? We find pork products. And you have photos and cameras and the like with the camera rolling, showing us the Uyghurs and Hans happily sitting together in the People's Republic of China as a so-called workers' paradise, consuming pork. So this is during evening hours when Muslims are permitted to eat. To say nothing of daylight hours when Uyghur students at Urumqi University are required to break their fast and to sit and eat with their deans and professors. This too has been reported by Human Rights Watch, to say nothing of the Uyghur Human Rights Project and the World Uyghur Congress. So it was unpleasant of me to start with those remarks, but I would be remiss as a historian if I had not done so. Let me proceed on to other matters, equally unpleasant, but perhaps a bit less bearable to hear out. What is happening is reprehensible, to say the least. Perhaps it's a crumb of comfort, and I take great pride as a Briton, particularly speaking from overseas just now, that my country and my parliament and my representatives have decided to call this out as a genocide for what it's worth. The oldest parliamentary democracy needs to take a stand and a precedent, and we have done just that. And we stand as an exemplar to the rest of the world. I wish we had done so back in 1971, given that Bangladesh turned 50 this year in March 2021, and there was a genocide committed against an ethno-linguistic Bengali minority then too by the Pakistani military junta. And to bandy about terms as genocide is no trifling matter. It has to be done with cognizance and with a careful selection of facts and predicated on evidence-based analysis, which leads me to discuss now what has happened pursuant to Westminster's calling out the Peking Politburo on what it has undertaken in Xinjiang. The PRC, People's Republic of China, is in violation of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide on several salient counts, as has been pointed out by the March 2021 Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights report, which I urge everyone to read and is available online as we speak. As with the 48 Genocide Convention, particularly under Article 2, what is Beijing guilty of? Raima and the World Uyghur Congress and other colleagues speaking at this webinar. It is, and I iterate this, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And I repeat for a Facebook Live audience, what Beijing is doing is, under the 1948 Convention's Article 2, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, close quote. And what does that pan out? I can only call salient aspects here: mass internment, mass birth prevention strategies, forcible treatment of Uyghur children, and ejection to state-convened facilities, and selective targeting of community leaders and intellectuals, as of course we saw, which happened in East Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh, when an oppressor, a hegemon, deliberately targets a community's lifeline and its intellectual wellsprings. And that is what is happening also in Xinjiang. So I need not rehearse all of these in detail and in very gory detail as we've been through this. But on that count, I would conclude by pointing out that on every such salient parameter of the 1948 Convention, the PRC must be found wanting, and it is something to state, even as it embarks on the 100th birth anniversary centenary in July 2021 of the Chinese Communist Party. Premier Xi has promised a party that no one would forget, as The Economist magazine noted, and that China can boast of having created a quote unquote moderately prosperous society. But at what cost? Excuse me, not just to the Uyghurs of Xinjiang and the Kazakhs and other Muslim minorities of Xinjiang, to say nothing of the Han Chinese who have suffered under this communist dictatorship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I think it was really very touching to hear about the Ramadan and obviously how the state is, showing a complete disregard for basic human rights. We have almost come to the end of our webinar. There are not general questions, but a few points. So I would just I'll just pose it to the panel to see if we can get any reaction. So we got a comment here saying that the China is already finished the job, like the COVID-19 evidence. When WHO went to Wuhan, they literally found nothing. So maybe I don't know if Mr. Sargent wants to come in, or Burzin, whoever. It's regarding the evidence disappearing from China, be it COVID, be it the genocide.
Well, I think the point is that we can't rely on China's cooperation on the matter, and that is why when Britain insists on UN inspectors before it can make any decision, we know that it's just a delay tactic, and it's a way of just further inaction. So it's very much our assessment has to be based on open source, on testimonies, of which there is plenty of evidence. The UK government shouldn't rely on cooperation from Beijing on these things. We know that they will try and cover them up and justify. They both deny and justify what they do, depending on who they're speaking to. So don't rely on Beijing for cooperation on this matter or COVID.
Thank you very much, sir. And there is another last comment, which I think probably Burzin and Rahima can come in there. And it's very sad and very heartbreaking for me to read it out, even saying that yes, Uyghurs in China will have to eat pork not only during Ramadan but to stay alive. I think that sums it also.
Rahima can go ahead first.
Look, I cannot imagine, this kind of, forced eating pork taking place in my country. And as you know, I left my country in 2000. I lost contact since 2017. And everything that I hear is from the news report or some personal testimonies. So I cannot bring myself to imagine this is happening and how people are coping, because like the background I come from is very different, when you compare to the majority people. So it's a difficult question for me even to answer, because I cannot simply imagine.
As a historian, if I come in on this, Rahima, and what the questioner said about staying alive, and I would like to tie that in with the CCP's birthday bash coming in July 2021. Xinjiang was always China's orchard. And what's more, it still is, as you know, in supplies of fruits. It always was self-sufficient in food grains. Now, take that remark of mine, Rahima, the last remark. It was always self-sufficient in food grains, the Jungaria Basin and other parts, despite the aridity of the region, against what were Mao's Great Leap Forward programs and disastrous Marxism, which led to artificial famines. It also led to the self-imposed departure and exile of Uyghurs in the early 60s, who fled to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan next door. So much for communism, so much for the left, the global left, which touts China as having created, well, as Xi Jinping would like to say with a sop, a moderately prosperous society. This is what Marxism and this is what the human face of socialism is, in creating mass artificial famines in places where there was no need to have a famine in the first place. Because China has historically experienced famines even in the pre-modern era. But Xinjiang, what is East Turkestan, did not, because it was always historically self-sufficient in food grains. And Raima, to your other remarks that you mentioned about politicians being politicians and the commercial world being what it is, business, will always have their vested interests, and Beijing will make them, well, literally kowtow to its demands. But what is more reprehensible, coming from my field, academia, where you find academics, again, those are of a liberal left disposition, who are willing to not just mildly criticize, but again, gloss over the PRC's report because it dovetails with their traditionally anti-Western stance on matters, and that somehow we ought not be ganging up on the communists or the PRC as a decolonial state, and that at least it has created some conditions of a, well, again, a so-called moderate prosperous society, when it's clearly not true. And we've seen what Mao has done to his own Han Chinese people, never mind the so-called national minorities, so to speak. And as far as national minorities goes, and this is my last remark, before I wind up, Marxist evolutionary social thinking, for all its cant about egalitarianism, Rahima and others, based this idea that the Han Chinese are primus inter pares, first among equals. Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Tibetans and other minorities are, well, less developed intellectually, culturally, historically, and therefore they ought to be guided. So that's patronizing socialism for you, which is anything but egalitarianism. It's plainly racist, and we ought to call it out for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Can I just add a few points, few points to that? Look, from my own experience, from childhood up until I left my country, I never know any Uyghur eat pork. Even the most secular Uyghurs don't. Simply, they just because the way of, well, that is the way of life is so important. I cannot imagine any Uyghur will agree to eat pork. That is, unless that the consequences is death or something so severe. Otherwise, they would refuse. That's from my as Uyghur and my own experience. Even when I studied in Dalian for 5 years, there hardly any like Muslim restaurant. We never went to any restaurants because I know many other Muslims normally go to like Chinese restaurant and then they order like vegetarian or other things. But the Uyghurs are very strict with, especially with Islamic, diet, because we believe the pots and everything, is not halal. Therefore, even without pork, is still not halal. And that is how we are. I mean, but I cannot imagine when people say people cannot survive without eating pork. That is not the case. That's just not the case. It's definitely because of this kind of pressure or the kind of threat or threaten that if you didn't do so, that you are against the CCP, or you are extremist, or threatening with imprisonment, camp, or taking away children. But as I said, it's difficult for me to imagine my people accept this.
Thank you very much, all of you. I think with that, we have come to the end of our today's webinar. I congratulate and thank all the distinguished speakers. And now I will hand you over back to our moderator of the Global Alliance for Tibet and other persecuted minorities for the final closing comments. Thank you very much. Best wishes.
Thank you, Priyajit. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, once again, thank you to all our amazing speakers, Miss Nasrat Ghani, MP, Grace Sargent from Henry Jackson Society and Hong Kong Watch, Rahima Mahmood from World Uyghur Congress, Berzin Wagner from SOAS University of London, for taking part in this important discourse, the groundbreaking resolution by UK lawmakers in declaration of Uyghur genocide. My special thank you to Priyaji Devsarkar for your excellent sharing today's online webinar discussion. At GTPM, the Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities, we very much value your expertise, knowledge, and thoughts, as well as for sparing your valuable time on uh, today. Uh, you have certainly helped with educating the public by raising awareness of the ongoing deplorable situation in China's occupied East Turkestan. Thank you also to our viewers and supporters for continuing engagements with our important advocacy and campaigning work for the peoples of Tibet, East Turkestan, as well as for all those who are facing persecutions, especially in China under the Chinese Communist regime. Rahima, a very powerful voice here in the UK from the Uyghur community and beyond, it has been a driving force for this genocide campaign as well as many other campaigns over the years. And I have had the privilege of joining in force. I think it was back in 2012 when we did this protest during the London Book Fair, which was, hugely, the presence from the Chinese, what do you call it, contingent from China. So we are looking forward to working more with you in the coming weeks, months, and over the year, because I myself, born in a Tibetan refugee camp, and I've never seen my homeland, and I know the story of how occupied Tibet and many of our elder generations endured under the repressive Chinese rule and the occupation. We are very determined through this platform. We will strike back to Beijing and we will not tolerate whatsoever. So, this platform is for good to challenge and be in unison with like minded causes like Tibet, Uyghur Muslims, and so on. So, we will come back and we will show Beijing that we will not go away until you end your repressive rule and the occupation of countries like Tibet, East Turkestan, and so on. Now, in the coming weeks, we are planning further webinars and events, including China Freedom of Religious Belief, to coincide with the month-long period of, birthday of His Holiness the 11th Panchen Lama. He was born on 25th of April 1989 and disappeared on 17th May 1995. At the age of 6, the young boy, recognized by the 11th Panchen Lama by the Tibetan spiritual leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, has since disappeared. And it has been going for so long. So we are hoping to have a good session on that. And furthermore, this year, later in July, the Chinese Communist Party is celebrating its centenary. And we will do things to expose their lies, they deceive in the months in the months ahead. So please tune in then. And then other events include boycott Beijing Olympics game as well. So that's about it. So once again, thank you ever so much to all our panelists, our viewers, and we can make difference. Each and individual can make a huge difference. So please in whatever way, as Rahima has appealed earlier, join the Uyghur genocide campaign and ensure China back off and take corrective measures for its wrongful acts in East Turkestan. Thank you very much and have a good day.